There's one word that we've been using a lot recently.
BS6 era.
BS6 emission norms.
BS6 version.
BS6 update.
And it is dreaded because
Less power, less torque.
0 to 60 times.
a little bit of weight, a slight drop in performance. But the RayZR is one happy scooter because Yamaha has used the transition period to give the youthful scoot a solid boost by going from a 110 to a 125cc. So how does it handle the usual stuff like price, performance, practicality, convenience, and most importantly, fuel efficiency? Well, let's get them answered. If the older RayZR's design was a bit much, then you would definitely find this very much in your face. Now, Yamaha designers seem to have gone overboard with the edges and panels on this scooter. Now, you may or may not be on board with this design, but one thing is for sure, it stands apart from the plethora of traditional looking scooters. And this is the street rally version. So you get these knuckle guards and block pattern tires. While we appreciate the logic behind the tires, these knuckle guards are purely aesthetic, so don't go thrashing up some trails. But you could act a bit more nonchalant when faced with somebody bearing down you the wrong way. Now it seems that the Yamaha engineers were designing the scooter for 2018 and not 2020 because there is no LED headlight here and the only bit of LED is on the small area, and calling this a DRL would be a bit of a stretch. Now we don't look down on halogen headlights as long as they do their job. This unit here simply fails to light up dimly lit roads. The throw isn't intense and it doesn't even have a wide spread. And then there is this digital instrument cluster. Aside from the usual bits like an odometer, a trip meter, speedometer and a fuel gauge, you get no other useful features here. Having a tachometer on a scooter is just useless. In fact, Yamaha could have utilized that space to offer something more useful like range indicator, average fuel efficiency indicator, or even a clock. And then we come to the underseat storage area. Now accessing it is quite simple. You just need to turn the key anti-clockwise in the ignition slot to open it. But underneath over here, you don't find an underseat storage light or even a USB charger, which is a bit of a shame. And lastly, Yamaha remain one of the few manufacturers to not offer an external fuel filler cap on their scooters. A convenience feature which is almost a norm on modern scooters. Now things don't seem to be too bright for the RayZR yet, but once you hop on, well, the feeling changes. Firstly, you're taken aback by the sense of lightness. It's almost magical. And clearly these extra body panels, which are made from plastic and not metal, do not add much to the weight. In fact, it is the joint lightest scooter in its class, along with its stylish sibling, the Facino 125. The practicality quotient really jumps when you combine its lightness with its fairly low seat height, which means reaching the floor for a rider of average height or even a shorter rider won't be that much of a bother. Plus, it is easy to maneuver into tight parking spots or even when propping it up onto the main stand. Even taller riders don't have to stress about space, as the handlebars are set on the higher side, and hence when you're taking sharp turns, these don't end up fouling with your knees. Now we just wished for more floorboard space. You see, the RayZR is not the smallest scooter here, nor does it have the shortest wheelbase. In fact, it is on par with the segment. Still, the packaging has been done in such a manner that you can't help but feel a bit restricted. The seat too has its shortcomings, but hang around for some time to know what the hiccup is. Now this Yami is not the most powerful scooter in its class, but being 4 kilos lighter than the Axis and 19 kilos lighter than the N-Torque, the RayZR claws back ground. In an acceleration test, it posts some significantly quick timings. In fact, it is a second quicker to 60 kmph and nearly a second and a half quicker to 80 kmph than the N-Torque. It bolts off the line and gathers steam quickly all the way up to 80-85 kmph, post which the power trails off smoothly. But while it romps ahead in terms of outright acceleration, the fairly linear power delivery of this new engine makes the RayZR a couple of tenths slower than the competition in roll-on times. It isn't too much of a bother though, as you can slice through slow-moving traffic with a simple twist of the throttle. Now this new 125cc 3-valve mill isn't the smoothest of the lot. A mild buzz can be felt through the floorboard at pretty much any speeds. Plus, the engine sounds a bit gruff and it doesn't even have a throaty, racy exhaust note to lend it an aural delight. But it has a trick up its sleeve.
Yamaha has followed in the footsteps of Honda and introduced its own alternator starter motor system called the Smart Motor Generator. Thumb the starter and there is no krr sound. It's just smooth and immediate. It isn't as subtle as the system on the Activa 125, but still it is a cool feature to have. And when you do come to a signal, the engine stop-start system kills the ignition within a couple of seconds, earlier than what you would experience on a Hero scooter. And once the light goes green, a slight dab of the brake lever and the slightest of throttle inputs brings the motor back to life. The lightness doesn't just make it quick, but
also quite frugal. In the city, the scooter manages to deliver class-leading fuel efficiency figures of 66 kmpl, and it can be attributed to two things. Firstly, less weight means less stress on the engine to get up to cruising speeds. And since it is fuel injected, Yamaha has been able to improve the combustion process, which leads to better volumetric efficiency, allowing you to ride for longer on a single tank full of gas.
on the highway, it isn't bad either. Matching the N-Torque's fuel efficiency figure, the slightly smaller fuel tank might force you to stop for fuel sooner, but the 25-30 km deficit in range will not be a deal breaker.
One of our complaints with the older RayZR was with the way Yamaha had tuned its suspension. It was on the firmer side and it was a bit jarring, which could be a bit too much for the scooter buyer. Thankfully, the new RayZR gets revised suspension units with different spring rates. The front telescopic fork has an initial bit of firmness to it, but the ride settles down once the speeds go higher. The monoshock is softly sprung, lending the RayZR a very plush riding experience. It can get a bit wallowy though if you take large speed breakers with vigor or if you have a pillion on board.
And speaking of getting a pillion on board, the RayZR has quite a large flat pillion section with a thick grab handle. The pillion footrest put your companion in quite a cozy spot.
The RayZR is not only fun in a straight line, but also makes for a worthwhile hooning scoot. It is so light that you barely need any effort to chuck it into a corner. And once it is leaned over, it is very composed, not as squirmy as it was earlier. And that is all down thanks to the 12-inch front wheel. The wheelbase is also quite long, adding extra stability to the equation. Now, can it school the N-Torque in this regard? Well, it's hard to say without riding the two back to back. Would you like us to compare the two scooters? Let us know in the comments. The braking units on offer are one of the best we've experienced in the 125cc segment so far. While braking distances might be in the same ballpark as its rivals, it is the lever feedback and the progression in the system that instills great braking confidence when you want to come to a stop very rapidly. But what does end up happening more often than not is that when you brake heavily, you end up sliding forward due to this raked seat design. Also, the texture on the seat doesn't stop you from slipping forwards, and we could do without having to constantly move around to find a sweet riding spot. So has stepping up to the fiercely fought 125cc scooter segment worked? Well, for starters, the RayZR hasn't stepped up its game on some fronts. Like the lack of modern features is a bit of a letdown, especially considering that the scooter is targeted towards the younger generation. And since the scooter now gets an all-new motor, we wished for better engine refinement from Japan's finest. But this new engine and chassis offer a lighter feel, which is great for easier maneuverability, better fuel efficiency and greater comfort, all of which make it a better scooter in everyday riding situations. And to top it off, it's also got peppy performance now. So the RayZR not only looks the part of a sporty scooter, it also has the performance to match it. And when you see that it is priced on par with some of its key rivals, it is clear that by stepping up to the 125cc segment, Yamaha has made the RayZR better and a more enjoyable scooter that can worry its rivals. And that is a great start.